The sound of pounding hooves tore through the peaceful afternoon air as Willa Zimmerman clung desperately to the wagon's wooden frame, her knuckles white with effort. The horses, spooked by a rattlesnake, had bolted into a frenzied gallop down the dusty trail that wound through the rugged Arizona territory. It was 1878, and the untamed wilderness showed no mercy to those who couldn't hold their own against its harsh demands. "Hold on." The driver shouted before being thrown from his seat, disappearing into the cloud of dust billowing behind them. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs as the wagon hit a deep rut, sending her body airborne. Her blue traveling dress fluttered around her as she was flung from the wagon like a rag doll, a scream tearing from her throat as the ground rushed up to meet her. Instead of the brutal impact she expected, strong arms caught her midair, pulling her against a solid chest. The momentum sent both of them tumbling, but the stranger shielded her with his body as they rolled to a stop in the dirt. When the world finally stopped spinning, Willa found herself staring up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a worn Stetson hat. "Are you hurt, madam?" The stranger asked, his voice deep and tinged with concern as he helped her to her feet. I don't think so," Willa stammered, brushing dust from her dress with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Finley Cooper," he said, touching the brim of his hat, just doing what any decent man would. But Willa knew better. What he'd done wasn't ordinary, it was extraordinary. And as the runaway wagon disappeared over the ridge, leaving her stranded with this mysterious cowboy, she had no idea how significantly her life had just changed. Finley Cooper surveyed the woman before him, noting her fine clothes and delicate features. She wasn't from around these parts, that much was clear. Her chestnut hair had partially escaped its pins, falling in soft waves around a face that looked too refined for the harsh desert landscape. "Your wagon's long gone, miss," he prompted. "Zimmerman, Willa Zimmerman," she replied, gathering her composure despite the circumstances. "I was traveling to Copper Springs to take a position as the new schoolteacher." Finley's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's quite a coincidence." "My ranch is just outside Copper Springs. I can escort you there, but it's a day's ride." Willa hesitated, glancing around at the empty wilderness stretching in every direction. She had little choice but to trust this stranger. "That's very kind, Mr. Cooper." "Call me Finley," he said, leading her to where his horse waited patiently. "We should check on your driver before we go. He took quite a fall." They found the wagon driver, an older man named Harold, nursing a sprained ankle but otherwise unharmed. After ensuring he could make it to a nearby way station, Finley helped Willa onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion named Rusty. "I'm afraid we'll have to ride double," he explained, mounting behind her. "Hold on tight." Willa tensed as his arms reached around her to take the reins, not accustomed to such proximity with a man she'd just met. Yet there was something reassuring about his presence, solid and dependable as the mountains on the horizon. As they rode, the sun began its descent, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber. Finley pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory, his deep voice a comforting rumble against her back. "How did you come to be out here alone?" Willa asked, curious about the man who had saved her. "Just returning from delivering some cattle to Fort Whipple," he replied. "Been ranching in these parts for 5 years now. Before that, I rode with the cavalry during the war." "And your family?" A moment of silence passed before he answered. "Lost my parents to fever when I was young. No siblings. The ranch is all I have." Something in his tone, a quiet resignation, made Willa's heart ache for him. She understood loneliness all too well. "And you, Miss Zimmerman, what brings a city girl to the Arizona territory?" Willa smiled wryly. "Is it that obvious I'm from the city?" "Your hands," he said simply. "Too smooth for frontier work." She glanced down at her hands, remembering her father's disapproval when she'd announced her plans to leave Philadelphia. "I needed a fresh start, my father. He had arranged a marriage for me with a business associate nearly twice my age. I refused." "Brave decision," Finley commented. "Or foolish," she countered. "I've never been on my own before." The frontier has a way of teaching self-reliance quickly, he said. But Copper Springs is a decent town, small but growing. The children need a good teacher. As darkness fell, they made camp beside a small creek. Finley efficiently built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky from his saddlebags. Willa watched him work, impressed by his quiet competence. "I'm afraid it's not what you're used to," he apologized, handing her a tin plate. "It's perfect," she assured him, suddenly ravenous. "I'm grateful for your help, Finley. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there today." His eyes met hers across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We have a long ride tomorrow." Willa lay awake for some time, wrapped in Finley's spare blanket, listening to the night sounds of the desert and watching the stars overhead. They seemed closer here, brighter than they'd ever been in Philadelphia. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, a strange sense of peace settled over her. Morning came with a chill that quickly burned away under the rising sun. Finley was already up, tending to his horse and preparing coffee over a fresh fire. He offered Willa a tin cup, the strong brew warming her hands. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice rough with morning. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Though I'm not used to sleeping on the ground." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You'll toughen up quick out here." They continued their journey as the day warmed, the landscape gradually changing from barren desert to scattered patches of grass and juniper trees. Willa found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of the horse and the solid presence of Finley behind her. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley where a small town nestled beside a winding creek. "Copper Springs," Finley announced, reining Rusty to a stop. "Not much to look at, but it's home." From their vantage point, Willa could see a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple, and scattered homesteads surrounding the town center. Beyond the settlement, rolling ranchland stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. Finley guided the horse down the trail toward town. As they rode down the main street, Willa was acutely aware of curious glances from townspeople going about their business. A woman riding double with Finley Cooper was evidently cause for interest. They stopped in front of a two-story building with a sign reading Copper Springs Hotel. "Mrs. Abernathy runs this place," Finley explained as he helped Willa down. "She's a good woman, if a bit nosy. You can stay here until you get settled." Before they could enter, a stout woman with graying hair hurried out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Finley Cooper, where on earth did you find this young lady?" she demanded, her sharp eyes taking in Willa's dusty appearance. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Willa Zimmerman, the new schoolteacher," Finley introduced them. "Her wagon had an accident outside of town. I happened to be passing by." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Oh, my dear, we were expecting you yesterday. The school board was worried when you didn't arrive." "My belongings were on the wagon," Willa explained, suddenly realizing the extent of her predicament. "Everything I brought with me is gone." "Don't you worry about that now," Mrs. Abernathy said, taking Willa's arm. "We'll get you settled with a hot bath and a proper meal." "The town has been looking forward to your arrival." Willa turned to Finley, suddenly reluctant to part ways with the man who had saved her life. "Thank you again, Mr. Cooper. I'm in your debt." He tipped his hat, those blue eyes warm as they met hers. "No debt, Miss Zimmerman." "I'm glad you made it safely." He hesitated, then added, "The schoolhouse is just down the street. I expect the children will be eager to meet their new teacher on Monday." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Willa with an unexpected sense of loss as she watched him disappear down the street. Mrs. Abernathy showed Willa to a small but clean room on the second floor of the hotel. True to her word, she arranged for a bath and fresh clothes borrowed from her daughter, who was of similar size to Willa. "The general store opens tomorrow," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "Mr. Dawson keeps a good selection of ready-made dresses, or Mrs. Peterson can sew something up for you if needed." "You're all very kind," Willa said, overwhelmed by the woman's generosity. "That's how we survive out here, dear, by helping each other." Mrs. Abernathy paused at the door. "And don't worry about Finley Cooper. He's a good man, even if he keeps to himself most of the time." Willa felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't." Mrs. Abernathy's knowing smile stopped her protest. "Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow you can meet the school board and see your new classroom." Alone at last, Willa sank onto the bed, the events of the past 2 days catching up to her. She had left Philadelphia with dreams of independence and purpose, but nothing had prepared her for being thrown from a wagon into the arms of a handsome cowboy. As she drifted to sleep, exhausted from her journey, it was Finley's blue eyes and gentle hands that followed her into her dreams. The following days passed in a blur of introductions and preparations. The school board, consisting of the town mayor, the local doctor, and 2 prominent ranchers, welcomed Willa warmly, impressed by her credentials despite her youth. At 22, she was younger than they had expected, but her education at a prestigious Philadelphia women's college spoke for itself. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove for winter, and a small attached living quarters that would serve as Willa's home. The previous teacher, an elderly widow who had returned east to live with her daughter, had left the place spotlessly clean. 27 students, Mayor Thompson informed her as they toured the building. Ages 6 to 16. Mostly ranchers' children, a few from town, good kids, though some of the boys can be a handful. "I'm looking forward to meeting them," Willa said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk, already imagining herself there. The community rallied around her, providing necessities to replace what had been lost with the wagon. Mrs. Peterson, the dressmaker, worked quickly to provide Willa with 2 serviceable dresses while alterations were made to others. Mr. Dawson at the general store extended credit until her first month's salary, insisting it was the least he could do for the town's educator. Through it all, Willa found herself watching for glimpses of Finley Cooper, but he didn't return to town. According to Mrs. Abernathy's gossip, his ranch, the Lazy Sea, lay about 5 miles outside of Copper Springs, and he typically only came to town for supplies once a week. By Sunday, Willa had settled into her quarters at the schoolhouse, arranged her classroom, and prepared for her first day of teaching. That evening, she attended services at the small white church, where Reverend Gardner introduced her to the congregation. Parents approached afterward, eager to meet their children's new teacher. Among them was a tall woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Martha Holloway. "My husband and I run the ranch neighboring Finley Cooper's," she explained. "Our 2 boys, Jacob and Samuel, will be in your class. Jacob's 12 and Samuel's 9. "I look forward to teaching them," Willa replied warmly. Martha hesitated, then added in a lowered voice, "Finley mentioned how he found you, quite the entrance you made to our little community." Willa blushed. "Not how I planned to arrive, I assure you." "Finley's not one for socializing much since his wife passed," Martha continued, "so him bringing you to town caused quite a stir." Willa's heart skipped. "His wife, Sarah, died in childbirth 3 years ago along with their baby. He hasn't been the same since." Martha's expression was sympathetic. "He's a good man, just wounded." The revelation stayed with Willa as she prepared for bed that night. It explained the sadness she'd sensed beneath Finley's quiet strength. He wasn't merely a solitary rancher, he was a man who had loved and lost. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Willa rang the school bell at precisely 8 o'clock, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement as children began filing into the classroom. They eyed her curiously, some shy, others boldly assessing their new teacher. "Good morning, children," she greeted them once all were seated. "I'm Miss Zimmerman, and I'm very pleased to meet each of you." The morning progressed smoothly as Willa assessed her students' various levels of education. She was impressed by their eagerness to learn, despite some gaps in their knowledge. The older boys, initially skeptical of the young, Eastern teacher, were won over when she demonstrated her proficiency in mathematics and history. At midday, as the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Willa noticed a rider approaching a familiar figure on a chestnut horse. Her heart quickened as Finley Cooper dismounted and tied Rusty to the hitching post. She smoothed her skirts and touched her hair, secured in a neat bun, before stepping outside to greet him. "Mr. Cooper," she said, hoping her voice sounded calmer than she felt. "What brings you to the schoolhouse?" He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. "Miss Zimmerman." "I was in town for supplies and thought I'd check how you're settling in." He gestured to his saddlebag. "Also brought something that might belong to you." From the bag, he withdrew a leather-bound book. Willa gasped in recognition. "My journal. It was in my trunk on the wagon." "Found the wagon about 10 miles north of where you fell," he explained. "Most things were scattered or broken, but this was intact. Figured it might be important to you." Willa accepted the journal, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "It contains my father's letters," she admitted. "The only things I have from home. Thank you, Finley." Their fingers brushed as she took the book, sending an unexpected warmth through her. For a moment, neither spoke, the connection between them tangible in the autumn air. The moment was broken by shouts from the schoolyard as two boys began arguing over a game. Willa reluctantly turned her attention to her students. "I should go," Finley said, replacing his hat. "Glad to see you're doing well, Miss Zimmerman." "Willa," she corrected him with a smile. "After all we've been through, I think you can call me Willa." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "Willa, then." He mounted his horse with fluid grace. "Good day to you." She watched him ride away, the journal clutched to her chest, aware of curious eyes observing from the schoolyard. The schoolteacher and the widowed rancher would be fodder for town gossip, she realized. But in that moment, she found she didn't mind. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Willa grew more confident in her teaching abilities as she connected with her students. She became a familiar figure in town, joining the ladies' quilting circle on Thursday evenings and attending Sunday services regularly. October brought cooler temperatures and preparations for the Harvest Festival, an annual tradition in Copper Springs. Willa's students practiced songs and recitations to perform, their excitement infectious. 2 weeks before the festival, Willa was surprised by a knock at her door one Saturday morning. She opened it to find Jacob Holloway, one of her older students, standing there with a nervous expression. "Morning, Miss Zimmerman," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "Pa sent me to ask if you could come to our ranch. Ma's taken ill, and we've got my little sister with no one to mind her while Pa and I tend the cattle." Concern immediately replaced Willa's surprise. "Of course, Jacob. Let me gather a few things." Within minutes, they were riding double on Jacob's pony toward the Holloway ranch. The boy explained that his mother had come down with a fever the previous night, and his father had already sent for the doctor from town. Upon arriving, Willa found the situation worse than expected. Martha Holloway lay in bed, her face flushed with fever, while her husband Thomas alternated between tending to her and trying to calm their frightened 4-year-old daughter, Emma. "Miss Zimmerman, I can't thank you enough," Thomas said, the relief evident in his tired eyes. "The cattle need moving to the lower pasture before the weather turns, and I can't leave Martha alone with Emma." "Please, don't worry," Willa assured him. "I'm happy to help." Thomas and Jacob departed to handle the ranch work, leaving Willa to care for Martha and entertain little Emma. The doctor arrived mid-morning, diagnosing Martha with influenza and prescribing rest and plenty of fluids. As the day progressed, Willa prepared soup, read stories to Emma, and kept cool compresses on Martha's forehead. By late afternoon, the sick woman's fever had begun to ease slightly, but she remained weak. Willa was in the kitchen preparing tea when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking out the window, she was surprised to see Finley Cooper dismounting from his horse, followed by Thomas Holloway. Finley rode over to help with the cattle, Thomas explained as they entered. "How's Martha?" "Resting more comfortably," Willa replied. "The doctor thinks the worst has passed, but she'll need care for several days." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, worry etched on his weathered face. "I don't know how we'll manage. Jacob and I have our hands full with the ranch work, and Emma needs looking after." "I could stay," Willa offered without hesitation. "Today is Saturday, and I don't have school until Monday. I can help through tomorrow at least." "We couldn't ask that of you," Thomas protested, though relief flickered in his eyes. "You didn't ask, I offered," Willa said firmly. Finley, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "I can ride into town and let Mrs. Abernathy know where you are, Miss Zimmerman, and perhaps bring back some supplies." "That would be very helpful," Willa said, meeting his gaze with gratitude. As the men returned to their work, Willa settled into caring for the Holloway household. She prepared dinner, helped Emma bathe, and continued tending to Martha. By evening, the young girl had grown attached to Willa, following her around the kitchen as she prepared a simple meal for the returning men. Thomas insisted Willa take their spare bedroom for the night, while he would sleep on a pallet near Martha. Jacob was tasked with taking Emma to his room where a trundle bed awaited her. To Willa's surprise, Finley stayed for dinner, having returned from town with medicines from the doctor and a change of clothes for Willa that Mrs. Abernathy had packed. "The storm's coming in faster than expected," he explained as they ate. "Thomas, you'll need help securing the north pasture fence before it hits." "I appreciate the help, neighbor," Thomas said sincerely. After dinner, while Thomas checked on Martha, Willa found herself alone with Finley on the porch. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Thank you for bringing my things," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "It was no trouble." He leaned against the porch railing, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "You've made quite an impression on this town in a short time," Willa smiled. "I've grown fond of Copper Springs. The people here have been so welcoming." "It suits you," he observed, teaching. "You have a natural way with children." "I always wanted to teach," she admitted. "My father thought it beneath our family's station, but it's all I've ever wanted to do." Finley studied her, his expression thoughtful. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Willa Zimmerman. Walking away from a comfortable life to pursue your own path." His words warmed her more than they should have. "What about you? Martha Holloway mentioned you weren't always a rancher." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Martha, making Willa wonder if he knew what else the woman had shared about his past. "I was a cavalry officer," he confirmed. "After the war, I drifted west, worked cattle drives, saved enough to buy my own spread." He paused, then added quietly, "Started a life here." Willa's heart ached, knowing what he wasn't saying. "It's a beautiful country to build a life in. It can be harsh," he warned, his eyes meeting hers. "Takes more than most people expect." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Cooper." A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his features. "I'm starting to see that, Miss Zimmerman." The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the porch roof. Finley straightened, reaching for his hat. "I should head back before the storm worsens," he said. "Thomas knows where to find me if you need anything." Willa nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Thank you again, Finley." He hesitated at the steps, looking back at her. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, but instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat and disappeared into the gathering darkness. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the valley, Willa lay awake thinking of Finley Cooper and the life he had lost. She wondered what Sarah had been like, the woman who had won his heart, and whether there was room in that heart for anyone else. By Sunday afternoon, Martha's condition had improved enough that Willa felt comfortable returning to town. Thomas offered to drive her in their wagon, despite the muddy roads left by the storm. "I can't thank you enough for your help," he said as they traveled. "Martha thinks the world of you, you know, says you're exactly what this community needed." "I'm grateful to have found such a welcoming place," Willa replied sincerely. Thomas cleared his throat. "Noticed Finley Cooper took a special interest in making sure you were settled. Not like him to ride to town twice in 1 week." Willa felt her cheeks warm despite the cool air. "Mr. Cooper has been very kind since my arrival." "Finley's the best man I know," Thomas said quietly. "What happened to Sarah nearly destroyed him. Threw himself into that ranch, barely speaking to anyone for months." He glanced at Willa. "First time I've seen him take notice of anything beyond his property line in 3 years." Willa didn't know how to respond, so she remained silent, but Thomas's words stayed with her long after he dropped her at the schoolhouse. Monday brought clear skies and the return to routine. Willa was discussing geography with her older students when the classroom door opened and Sheriff Davidson stepped in, his expression grave. "Pardon the interruption, Miss Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Concern flickered through her as she assigned her students independent work and stepped outside with the sheriff. "What is it, Sheriff? Got word this morning that they caught the gang that's been robbing stagecoaches between here and Prescott," he explained. "Found your trunk among their loot. It's being held at the marshal's office in Prescott until you can claim it." Relief washed over Willa. "That's wonderful news, but Prescott is nearly 50 miles from here." "That's why I'm here," the sheriff continued. "Marshal needs you to identify your belongings. I'm headed that way tomorrow with a prisoner. You're welcome to ride along in my wagon if you'd like to recover your things." Willa hesitated, considering the journey. How long would we be gone? 3 days, likely. Day there, day for business, day back. 3 days away from her students was not ideal, but the opportunity to recover her possessions, clothing, books, and personal items she'd thought lost forever was too important to pass up. "I'll need to arrange for someone to take my classes," she said thoughtfully. "Already spoke to Mrs. Thompson," the sheriff assured her. "She taught school before she married the mayor, says she'd be happy to step in." With that settled, Willa agreed to the journey. The following morning, she met Sheriff Davidson at his office just after dawn, dressed in her sturdiest traveling clothes and carrying a small bag with essentials. The sheriff's wagon was already prepared, with his prisoner, a young man accused of horse theft, securely shackled in the back. The journey began uneventfully, with the sheriff sharing stories of the area's history as they traveled the rough road toward Prescott. By midday, however, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising another storm. The sheriff frowned at the sky. "Don't like the look of that," he muttered. "We might need to seek shelter if it gets bad." The storm hit with unexpected ferocity an hour later, turning the dirt road to mud and reducing visibility to mere feet ahead of the horses. Sheriff Davidson struggled to keep the team under control as thunder crashed overhead. "There's a way station about 2 miles ahead," he shouted over the downpour. "We'll stop there until this passes." But they never reached the way station. As they crossed a normally shallow creek, now swollen with rainwater, the current caught the wagon wheels. Before Willa could register what was happening, the wagon lurched sideways, tipping precariously. "Jump!" the sheriff yelled, already leaping from his seat. Willa didn't hesitate. She launched herself from the wagon just as it overturned completely, plunging into the rushing water. Cold shock hit her as she landed in the churning creek. Her skirts immediately becoming waterlogged and heavy, fighting panic, she struggled toward what she hoped was the shore, unable to see through the rain and spray. Her foot caught on something underwater and she went under, swallowing a mouthful of muddy water before breaking the surface again, coughing and sputtering. "Miss Zimmerman." The sheriff's voice sounded distant through the roar of water and rain. Willa tried to call back, but another wave of water pushed her under again. This time, when she surfaced, she glimpsed the sheriff on the far bank, helping his handcuffed prisoner to safety. Relief that they had survived mingled with her growing fear as the current carried her further downstream. Her strength was fading when her hand struck something solid, a tree branch extending over the water. With the last of her energy, she grasped it, pulling herself toward the shore. The muddy bank offered little purchase for her sodden boots, and she feared her grip would fail before she could drag herself to safety. Suddenly, strong hands grasped her arms, hauling her from the water's clutches. Through water-blurred eyes, she looked up to see Finley Cooper soaked to the skin, his face etched with concern. "Finley," she gasped, collapsing against him as her legs gave way. "I've got you," he said, lifting her into his arms. "Hold on." Through the driving rain, he carried her to where his horse waited beneath a large tree. With efficiency born of urgency, he wrapped her in his oilskin coat and mounted, pulling her up before him. "Sheriff Davidson," she managed through chattering teeth. "And the prisoner." "On the other side," Finley assured her. "I saw them make it out. We need to get you warm." He urged his horse forward through the storm, holding Willa securely against his chest. She was too exhausted and cold to question how he happened to be there, grateful only for his timely appearance. They rode for what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes before reaching a small, sturdy cabin nestled among pine trees. "Line shack," Finley explained as he dismounted, still cradling her. "Use it during roundup." Inside, the cabin was simple but dry, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and basic supplies. Finley immediately set about building a fire, working quickly while Willa stood shivering, water pooling beneath her feet. Once flames flickered to life in the hearth, he turned to her, his expression grave. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I have spare clothes in that trunk. They'll be too big, but they're dry." He moved toward the door. "I'll see to my horse, give you privacy." Willa nodded gratefully, too cold to feel embarrassed. As soon as Finley left, she peeled off her sodden dress, petticoats, and undergarments with difficulty, her fingers numb and clumsy. From the trunk, she found a flannel shirt, woolen trousers, and thick socks. The clothing swallowed her slender frame, but the blessed dryness was worth any indignity. She had just finished rolling up the trouser legs when Finley knocked and entered, carrying a bundle of firewood. He stopped short at the sight of her, and despite everything, Willa felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Better?" he asked, his voice gruff as he added wood to the fire. "Much," she replied, moving closer to the warmth. "Thank you, Finley." He hung his wet hat and jacket near the fire, then set about preparing coffee on the small cast iron stove in the corner. His movements were efficient, practiced, as he worked in the confined space. "How did you find me?" Willa asked as he handed her a steaming mug. "Was checking fence lines after the storm started," he explained. "Saw the wagon overturn from the ridge, recognized you when you surfaced." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Nearly stopped my heart seeing you in that water." The raw emotion in his voice sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire or coffee. "I seem to make a habit of falling into danger around you," she said, attempting lightness despite the gravity of the situation. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Try not to make it a regular occurrence." They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside, the small cabin a haven of warmth and safety. Finley produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, a simple meal that Willa accepted gratefully. As evening approached, the rain showed no signs of abating. Finley stoked the fire and lit the cabin's single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. "We'll have to stay here tonight," he said, stating what was already obvious. "Creeks too high to cross safely, especially in the dark." Willa nodded, acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. Alone in a one-room cabin with a man she barely knew yet trusted implicitly. "The sheriff will be worried," she said. "He knows about this line shack," Finley assured her. "If he saw us heading this direction, he'll know we're safe." As full darkness fell outside, the constraints of the small space became more apparent. There was only one bed, narrow but adequate for one person. "You take the bed," Finley said firmly. "I'll sleep by the fire." Willa started to protest, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she settled onto the straw-filled mattress, pulling the rough woolen blanket around her. From her position, she watched Finley as he spread his bedroll near the hearth, his profile strong in the firelight. Questions burned within her about his presence on the ridge, about his past, about the connection she felt growing between them despite their brief acquaintance. "Finley," she said softly, drawing his attention. "I know about Sarah." He stilled, his back to her, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "Martha Holloway mentioned her," Willa continued gently. "I'm sorry for your loss." For a long moment he remained silent, and Willa feared she had overstepped. Then slowly he turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Sarah was kind," he said finally, his voice low. "Gentle. Deserved better than dying in childbirth on a remote ranch with only a frightened husband and a midwife who arrived too late." The pain in his words was palpable, a wound still raw after 3 years. "I'm sure you did everything you could," Willa said softly. Finley shook his head, moving to sit on the edge of the hearth facing her. I wanted to give her a good life, promised her father I would. Instead, I buried her and our son on a hillside overlooking land that meant nothing without them. Willa's heart ached for him. Is that why you stay? To be near them, at first, he admitted. Then it became habit, easier than starting over somewhere else. He met her gaze directly, until recently. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Willa's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. What changed? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Finley's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. You know what changed, Willa? The simple honesty of his words took her breath away. Outside, thunder rumbled, a distant echo of the storm that still surrounded them. But in that moment, the only thing that existed for Willa was the man before her and the connection that had been building since the moment he caught her in his arms. I should let you rest, he said, breaking the charged silence. It's been a long day, Willa nodded, disappointed yet understanding his restraint. As he moved back to his bedroll, she settled deeper under the blanket, listening to the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional pop from the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for some time, her mind replaying Finley's words and the look in his eyes when he'd spoken them. When she finally drifted off, it was to dreams of strong arms and blue eyes that saw through to her very soul. Morning brought clear skies and sunshine streaming through the cabin's single window. Willa awoke to find Finley already up, tending to the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and the last of the hardtack. "Creek's down," he reported when he noticed she was awake. "We can cross safely now." Willa sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after a night in borrowed clothes. "My dress," she began, looking around. "Still damp," Finley said, "but wearable if we need to ride into town." The thought of returning to Copper Springs in her current state wearing Finley's clothes, her hair disheveled, made Willa cringe, imagining the gossip that would ensue. "Perhaps we should check on Sheriff Davidson first," she suggested. "Make sure he and his prisoner are all right." Finley nodded, understanding her concern. "We'll follow the creek back to where the wagon overturned." After a quick breakfast, they set out. Willa's dress was indeed still damp, but she wore it over Finley's dry shirt for warmth. They rode double on Rusty, with Finley's strong presence at her back providing both security and a distraction Willa struggled to ignore. They found the sheriff at the crossing, already working with several men from a nearby ranch to retrieve the overturned wagon. He waved in relief when he spotted them. "Miss Zimmerman, thank the Lord you're safe," he called. "When I saw Cooper pull you from the water, I hoped he'd get you to shelter." "We stayed at the line shack," Finley explained, dismounting and helping Willa down. "Creek was too high to cross." The sheriff nodded, apparently finding nothing improper in the arrangement. "Prisoner and I made it to the Johnson Ranch, got him secured in their storehouse for now." He looked apologetically at Willa. "I'm afraid our trip to Prescott will have to be delayed, Miss Zimmerman. Wagon's in no shape to travel and these roads won't be passable for days." Willa hid her disappointment. "I understand, Sheriff. I'm just grateful we all survived." "I can take Miss Zimmerman back to town," Finley offered, "unless you need help here." The sheriff waved them off. "Got plenty of hands here. You get our schoolteacher home safe, Cooper." As they rode toward Copper Springs, Willa was acutely aware of the gossip that would surely follow their arrival. A night alone with Finley Cooper would set tongues wagging for weeks, regardless of the innocent circumstances. "You're worried about your reputation," Finley observed, ever perceptive. "Small towns have long memories," she replied, trying to sound unconcerned. "And sharp tongues," he agreed. "Would it help if I said I'd marry you to quiet them?" Willa's heart lurched at his words until she glanced back and saw the teasing glint in his eyes. She relaxed, laughing despite herself. "Finley Cooper, that is not a proper proposal, and you know it." His chuckle rumbled against her back. "Never claimed to be proper, Miss Zimmerman." By the time they reached town, Willa had resolved to face whatever gossip might come with her head held high. To her surprise, however, their arrival caused less stir than expected. News of the wagon accident had already reached Copper Springs, and concern for her safety outweighed any impropriety in her return. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she stay at the hotel until she was fully recovered from her ordeal. The mayor's wife brought a selection of dresses to replace those lost in the accident, and the school board granted her 2 days of rest before resuming her teaching duties. Through it all, Finley remained quietly supportive, checking on her daily but maintaining a respectful distance in public. Only the knowing looks from Mrs. Abernathy suggested anyone suspected deeper feelings between them. By Thursday, life had returned to normal. Willa resumed teaching, her students full of questions about her adventure in the flooded creek. She answered with appropriate modesty, downplaying both the danger and Finley's heroic rescue. That afternoon, as she dismissed her students, she was surprised to find Finley waiting outside, rusty saddled and ready beside him. "Mr. Cooper," she greeted him formally, aware of curious children watching. "What brings you to the schoolhouse? Thought you might like to retrieve your trunk," he said. "Sheriff rode to Prescott yesterday, returned this morning with your belongings." Joy surged through Willa. "They're here in town." Finley nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "At the sheriff's office. Thought you might appreciate an escort." Together they walked to the sheriff's office, where her trunk indeed waited. Though some items had been damaged by water or rough handling, most of her clothing, books, and personal mementos had survived intact. "Can't tell you how much this means to me," she told the sheriff gratefully. "Don't thank me," Davidson replied. "Was Cooper here who insisted on riding to Prescott with me, said it was important to you?" Surprised, Willa turned to Finley, who shrugged off the sheriff's words. "Needed supplies anyway," he said dismissively, though the warmth in his eyes told a different story. With the help of the sheriff's deputy, they loaded the trunk onto Finley's wagon borrowed for the occasion and transported it to the schoolhouse. As they carried it inside, Willa's mind whirled with the realization that Finley had gone to such trouble for her sake. "Would you like help unpacking?" he offered once the trunk was settled in her quarters. "That's very kind, but I can manage," she replied, suddenly shy. "Thank you, Finley, for everything," he nodded, his hat in his hands. "Harvest festival's this Saturday," he said, changing the subject. "Will you be attending?" "Of course." "My students are performing." He shifted his weight, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering if you might save a dance for me." The simple request sent warmth blooming through Willa's chest. "I'd like that very much." His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. "Until Saturday, then." After he left, Willa opened her trunk, sorting through the recovered belongings with a lightness in her heart that had nothing to do with material possessions. The prospect of dancing with Finley at the festival filled her with anticipation she hadn't felt since girlhood. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunshine, and trees displaying their fall colors. The town square had been transformed with harvest decorations, tables laden with food, and a wooden platform for dancing. Willa's students performed admirably, reciting harvest poems and singing traditional songs to the delight of their parents and neighbors. Afterward, as musicians tuned their instruments for dancing, Willa found herself surrounded by well-wishers and parents expressing gratitude for her dedication to their children. She was speaking with the mayor's wife when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Finley, dressed in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed beneath his good hat. The transformation from rugged rancher to gentleman was subtle but striking. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "I believe you promised me a dance." Willa excused herself from Mrs. Thompson and allowed Finley to lead her to the dance floor. As the fiddles struck up a lively reel, she placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and self-reliance. They moved together with surprising ease, as if they'd been dancing partners for years rather than mere acquaintances. Finley guided her confidently through the steps, his usual reserve softening as they whirled among other couples. "You dance well for a solitary rancher," Willa teased as the music slowed to a waltz. "Sarah made me practice," he admitted, drawing her closer as the dance required. "Said no husband of hers would stand like a fence post at social gatherings." The mention of his wife came easier now, without the sharp edge of pain. Willa took it as a positive sign. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, he agreed. She'd have liked you, I think. The simple statement touched Willa deeply. As they continued to dance, the rest of the gathering seemed to fade away, leaving only the music and the man whose arms held her with gentle strength. When the waltz ended, Finley didn't immediately release her hand. Instead, he led her away from the dance floor toward the edge of the square, where lanterns cast a soft glow against the gathering dusk. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity piqued, Willa nodded. They strolled away from the festivities, following a path that led toward the church and the small cemetery beyond. Willa's pulse quickened, wondering at his intentions. In the cemetery, Finley stopped before a well-tended grave marked with a simple stone. "This is Sarah," he said quietly. Willa read the inscription. Sarah Elizabeth Cooper, beloved wife and mother, 1848–1875. The significance of him bringing her here wasn't lost on Willa. This was no casual gesture, it was an invitation into the most painful part of his past. "I come here every Sunday after church," Finley said, his voice steady. "For 3 years I've talked to her about the ranch, the weather, the cattle, never much else to say." He paused, his eyes meeting Willa's in the fading light. "Last Sunday I told her about you." Willa's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "That a city girl from Philadelphia got thrown from a wagon into my arms, and nothing's been the same since." His voice softened. "That I never expected to feel this way again, and it terrifies me almost as much as it gives me hope." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes as she understood what it cost this proud, private man to speak so openly. "Finley," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He took it, his grip warm and sure. "I'm not good with words, Willa, never have been, but I know when something rare comes along." He took a breath. "I care for you more than I thought possible, and if you need time or if your feelings don't match mine, I'll understand, but I couldn't let another day pass without telling you." Willa's heart swelled with emotion. In the short time she'd known him, Finley Cooper had become more important to her than she'd ever imagined possible. His strength, his integrity, his gentle heart beneath the stoic exterior all had drawn her to him with increasing power. "My feelings match yours," she said simply, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I care for you too, Finley, very much." Relief and joy transformed his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, and Willa leaned into his touch, savoring the connection between them. When they finally parted, the festival seemed far away, though the sound of music and laughter drifted on the evening breeze. "We should return," Finley said reluctantly, "before they send a search party." Willa nodded, but before they left, she turned once more to Sarah's grave, silently thanking the woman who had first loved the man now holding her hand, and promising to treasure the heart he was trusting her with. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Willa's life. Though they maintained propriety in public, Finley calling on her at the schoolhouse for Sunday walks or escorting her to church, their growing relationship was no secret in the small community. To Willa's relief, the townspeople seemed genuinely pleased. Mrs. Abernathy declared it about time Finley Cooper found happiness again, while Martha Holloway, recovered from her illness, invited them both to dinner with a knowing smile. As winter approached, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Copper Springs, Willa found herself contemplating a future far different from what she'd imagined when leaving Philadelphia. Teaching still fulfilled her, but her dreams now included a ranch house with a view of distant peaks, and a life shared with a man whose quiet strength had become her anchor. One crisp December afternoon, Finley arrived at the schoolhouse just as Willa was dismissing her students for the day. Something about his expression, a mixture of nervousness and determination, sent her heart racing. "Would you ride with me?" he asked once the children had dispersed. "There's something I'd like you to see before the weather turns." Intrigued, Willa agreed. They rode double on Rusty, heading away from town toward the foothills where Finley's ranch lay. Though she had heard much about the lazy sea, Willa had never visited, and excitement bubbled within her as they crested a rise overlooking a picturesque valley. Below, nestled against a backdrop of pine forest, stood a sturdy ranch house with smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby, a large barn and corral housed cattle and horses, while a creek wound through pastureland that stretched toward distant ridges. "It's beautiful," Willa breathed as they paused to take in the view. "It's home," Finley said simply. "Or it could be." The significance of his words wasn't lost on her. This wasn't merely a tour, it was an invitation. They continued down the trail, Rusty picking his way carefully on the uneven ground. As they approached the ranch house, Willa noticed fresh paint on the porch and new curtains in the windows, small touches that spoke of recent attention. Finley helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "I've been making some improvements," he explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. Martha helped with the curtains. Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, and doors leading to several bedrooms. Everything was scrupulously clean, with touches of domesticity that surprised her: braided rugs on the plank floors, landscape paintings on the walls, bookshelves filled with volumes on ranching, history, and literature. "This was Sarah's," Finley said, indicating a small writing desk near a window overlooking the valley. "She used to sit here in the evenings, writing letters to her family back east." Willa moved to the desk, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface. "It's lovely." "I thought perhaps," he paused, clearing his throat. "I thought you might use it if you wanted." Her heart quickened at the implication. Turning to face him, she found Finley watching her intently, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "Finley, I love you, Willa," he said, the words emerging with quiet certainty. "I know it hasn't been long by most standards, but out here we learn quickly what matters." He took her hands in his. "You matter, more than I can say." Tears of happiness welled in Willa's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. Relief and joy washed over his features. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they headed west from Kentucky before I was born." He took a deep breath. "Willa Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this house a home again?" Joy unlike anything she'd ever known filled Willa's heart. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Finley Cooper, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to one another. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church of Copper Springs, with the entire community in attendance. Martha Holloway helped Willa prepare a simple but elegant white dress, while Thomas stood as Finley's best man. Willa's students sang carols before the ceremony, their young voices filling the church with joy that matched the occasion. As Reverend Gardner pronounced them husband and wife, snow began to fall outside, dusting the town in white. When Finley kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the gathered townspeople, celebrating not just the union of two people they had come to love, but the healing of a man many had feared would never find happiness again. The reception at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the couple's future. When they finally departed for the ranch, their home, Finley wrapped Willa in furs against the cold and drove the sleigh through moonlit snow, the bells jingling merrily in the winter night. "Happy, Mrs. Cooper?" he asked as they approached the ranch house, where lights glowed welcomingly in the windows. "Martha's doing, ensuring the newlyweds would arrive to a warm home." "Perfectly," Willa replied, nestling against his side. "Though I still can't believe how much has changed since I was thrown from that wagon." Finley's arm tightened around her. "Best day of my life catching you. Even better than today," she teased. His kiss was answer enough, tender and promising in the quiet of the winter night. Later, as they stood before the fireplace in their home, Finley presented Willa with a final wedding gift, a framed photograph of the two of them taken by a traveling photographer during the harvest festival. In the image, they were standing close, her hand on his arm, both smiling with unmistakable happiness. "First of many memories we'll make here," he said, placing the frame on the mantel. Willa leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. "I never imagined when I left Philadelphia that I'd find everything I was looking for and more. And I never imagined when I rode out that day that my life was about to change forever," Finley replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Seems like fate had plans for both of us." As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing their ranch in pristine white, Willa silently blessed the runaway wagon that had thrown her into the arms of the man who now held her heart. The journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty had led to love and belonging beyond anything she could have dreamed. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers blanketing the valley around the lazy sea. Willa divided her time between teaching at the schoolhouse and learning the rhythms of ranch life. To her delight, she discovered an aptitude for record-keeping and business matters that complemented Finley's practical knowledge of cattle and land. Together, they transformed the lazy sea into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Finley expanded the herd, while Willa established a vegetable garden and started a small orchard that promised future harvests. They hired 2 young cowboys to help with the increasing workload, building a bunkhouse near the barn for the ranch hands. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. Sometimes they spoke of the future dreams of children running through the pastures, of expanding the ranch, of growing old together in the home they had built. Other times, they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, a shared peace that needed no words. In July, as they celebrated their first Independence Day as a married couple, Willa shared news that brought tears of joy to Finley's eyes. They were expecting a child in the winter. That night, as they lay together in their bedroom, Finley placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he confessed. "After Sarah and the baby, I closed that door in my heart." Willa covered his hand with hers. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I am too, but we'll face this together just as we've faced everything else." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and hope and fear into the gesture. "I love you, Willa Cooper, more than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Dr. Bennett making regular visits to the ranch to check on Willa's condition. As her body changed, Finley treated her with a tenderness that endeared him to her even more, insisting she rest when needed and taking on additional responsibilities to ease her burden. By December, with the baby due any day, they had prepared a nursery in the room adjacent to theirs. Martha Holloway and the other ranch wives had organized a gathering to present Willa with handmade baby clothes, blankets, and a beautiful cradle crafted by Thomas Holloway himself. The town had embraced Willa not just as their teacher, but as a beloved member of the community. When snow made travel to the schoolhouse difficult in her condition, the school board arranged for her older students to take turns bringing assignments to younger children, ensuring education continued while allowing Willa to rest. On a snowy evening just before Christmas, their first anniversary approaching, Willa felt the first contractions. Finley, who had barely left her side in the final weeks, immediately sent a ranch hand riding for the doctor, while Martha Holloway arrived to assist with the birth. Unlike Sarah's tragic labor, Willa's progressed normally, though the pain was intense. Throughout the long night, Finley remained by her side, wiping her brow, holding her hand, and whispering words of encouragement and love. As dawn broke on December 23rd, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears of relief and joy to both parents. Martha placed the swaddled infant in Willa's arms, her own eyes moist with happiness. "She's perfect," Willa whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes with wonder. "Just like her mother," Finley said, his voice breaking as he gazed at his wife and daughter with undisguised adoration. They named her Elizabeth Sarah Cooper Elizabeth for Willa's mother, and Sarah in honor of the woman whose memory would always be a part of their family, Dr. Bennett pronounced both mother and child healthy, a pronouncement that released the last of Finley's deep-seated fears. That night, as Willa nursed their daughter in the rocking chair beside the fireplace, Finley knelt beside them, overwhelmed by gratitude for the second chance at happiness he'd been given. "A year ago, we were preparing for our wedding," he remarked, gently stroking Elizabeth's downy head. "And now we're a family. The best Christmas gift I could have imagined," Willa agreed, leaning down to kiss him softly. Word of Elizabeth's birth spread quickly through the community. Despite the winter weather, visitors came to the ranch bearing gifts and well wishes. The schoolchildren, led by Jacob Holloway, now a tall teenager, presented a hand-drawn alphabet book for Miss Willa's baby, promising to be the best students ever when she returned to teaching. As their first anniversary and Christmas arrived, Finley surprised Willa with a silver locket containing miniature portraits of themselves to be passed to Elizabeth when she was older. "So she'll always carry us with her," he explained, "no matter where life takes her." The gesture moved Willa deeply. "She'll know how much she was wanted and loved," she promised. "How her father caught her mother when she fell and never let go." Finley smiled, drawing his wife and daughter into his embrace. "Best catch I ever made," he murmured against Willa's hair. "And I plan to hold on forever." As snow fell softly outside their window, the Cooper family celebrated their first Christmas together, not just a milestone, but the beginning of a lifetime of love that had started with a runaway wagon and a cowboy's strong arms. Over the years that followed, the Cooper family flourished alongside their ranch. Elizabeth grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined nature. She was joined 2 years later by a brother, Thomas Finley, named for their steadfast friend Thomas Holloway. Willa returned to teaching part-time as the children grew, bringing them with her to the schoolhouse that had expanded to 2 rooms to accommodate Copper Springs' growing population. Her students, some now approaching adulthood, remained devoted to their teacher, who had enriched the community's educational standards beyond what anyone had thought possible in a frontier town. Finley's reputation as a rancher of integrity spread throughout the territory. The Lazy Sea cattle brand became known for quality, and his fair dealings with both customers and employees earned him respect that extended far beyond Copper Springs. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Finley was among those invited to the capital's celebrations, a testament to his standing in the community. Through it all, the love that had begun with a chance rescue only deepened with time. Finley and Willa faced the challenges of frontier life together: droughts, harsh winters, economic uncertainties drawing strength from each other and the family they had created. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes reminisce about their unusual first meeting, marveling at how a moment of danger had led to a lifetime of happiness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been riding that trail that day?" Willa would ask, nestled against her husband's side on the porch swing he had built for her birthday one year. "No need to wonder," Finley would reply with certainty. "I believe we were meant to find each other one way or another." And as they watched their children playing in the yard of the home they had built together, both agreed that some falls were truly blessings in disguise. The cowboy who had once caught a falling woman against his chest had found in that moment not just a woman to love, but a future brighter than he had ever dared to dream.